I'm so happy to see so many known and unknown faces at 10 in the morning. It's very, very appreciative. Second day of the Loop Symposium. I'm not going to speak much. I just wanted to welcome everyone, and in particular our speakers who are here with us. We're having a panel moderated by Sarah Johanna Theurer. Thank you very much for being here. As yesterday, I'm not going to do introductions. You have everyone's biography on the booklet. It also saves us a little bit more time, and I don't think there's any need for describing the amazing projects and works and ideas that each one of these speakers has made. We're going to start with a keynote by Sarah. We're going to be followed by an individual presentation by Barbara Cueto, followed by Alistair Hudson and Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev. Kay Watson unfortunately cannot join us. She's about to have a baby. We were actually playing with the team saying that we would probably have a Loop baby. The Loop baby will be born in London, as it was expected. But Kay got sick with a cold, and she can't take a lot of medicine, and she's really unwell. So she thought, and we agreed, that it was better for her not to travel. But this will give us a little bit more time to have questions, discussions. And so, yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Filipa, for the nice introduction. I'm very happy to be discussing virtual trust with you today, especially as we think of the digital technologies often as like trustless technologies, right? As they rely on protocols and verification mechanisms rather than trust, as we discussed it yesterday, between the artist and the curator in the institution. So the subtitle is on digital circulation, authorship and ownership. And yesterday we already spoke about karaoke as a form of moving image. And I think today we're going to look even more at the digital realm, where really moving images everywhere, is in the apps, is in games, on online platforms. And so curating, I think, becomes less about display, but much more about transmission also, or this question becomes like a really important question to curating. So yeah, today we're going to speak about works that start their life as a file or as a generative piece of media, rather than maybe videotape or an object. And we want to discuss the implications of that for our work, and hopefully also discuss with you. I want to start by introducing two projects, two works specifically, that I think open up these questions. They're not like strictly moving image works or artist cinema, but I think they are anchored in this practice, and then they move across different, let's say, image ecologies. So I want to start. I'm going to take my notes. The first project I want to introduce is this exhibition we had on recently at Haus der Kunst in Munich, where I work as a curator. This was the first survey exhibition of filmmaker and net artist Shu-Li Chang. She is a Taiwanese artist and was really, one of the first, I think, artists to work on the internet. The work I want to present here is what you can see on the walls projected. It's called Composting the Net. And this is a work that kind of lives on the web browser. It's from 2012, and the idea is that we're composting mailing lists. I don't know if any of you, or like all of you, know what a mailing list is. I used to explain it as like a proto-social media. I guess Alistair, you know very well. I think ZK actually like grows also from that culture of mailing lists, and it comes with a specific idea of authorship and Creative Commons. And so this piece, which I can show you also as it lives on the browser, it's pretty simple. So the idea is that we choose one of these mailing lists in this very simple drop-down menu, and then start composting the contents of this mailing list. In this case, it's NetTime, sorry, and you can stop and like read the text, and there's all of these like event announcements, discussions. This is really like, I think, art history being made like live, right? And you will recognize many names, many filmmakers, many artists like discussing their work. And it's actually pretty interesting to witness this kind of production of an artwork, I think, because what's key here is really that the artwork doesn't really exist until I visit the website and navigate it and activate it. You can see below here on the bottom the kind of sprouts growing, which is this idea of the composting, and draws on like the question of how much information is circulating online. Is there like a digital landfill? Is there something like the online trash? What do we do with all of this information? So this work is from 2012, so it's like an historic work, and it also plays with the idea of internet, like pre-Web 2, basically. Yeah, as I said, there's a certain idea of artwork that we encounter here, which sees authorship as something that is more procedural or like even algorithmic, and the trust between the artist and their network, which is really key, because obviously these information that are building the content of the artwork, they're on maybe some university server, maybe some private computer of someone who is like hosting this mailing list. And we cannot really know where they are, and if someone decides to like stop paying for the server, then the content of the work is gone. So restaging this work for the exhibition was quite a lot of emailing and trying to find the people who are still maintaining these informations or these contents. And interestingly, I want to note here that most of these like information that's like circulating online, accessibly circulating online, is now used to train LLMs. So the contents or the work actually is not really, like the rights are not really being honored, right? So the trust here becomes like a really central question. As I also mentioned, this idea of the internet as like something where we like collectively contribute to like an experience is probably not really responding to the current moment anymore. But in this specific world of Julie Chang's work, who worked a lot around piracy and open access models, I think, yeah, it does pose an interesting question, or like historic lineage maybe, on where these works that circulate online today, which mindset or which ideology they might be coming from. The second work that I want to introduce is a newer, more recent project, and it's by Italian duo Inverno Muto, and it's something that we are working on at Haus der Kunst right now. They are working across music and moving image, and have these like really longer like research projects, which extend through performances, publishing projects, films, and then also, as you can see here, like listening sessions. And the work that we are producing or commissioning now at Haus der Kunst is a sort of extended environment. It's a sentient object, but it's also a lot about the distribution of this object and our relation with it. It's kind of anchored in a pond in northern Italy, where a colony of tritons, of newts, is living in the pond. And we filmed this pond, and the live stream basically triggers the actions of the object. It sounds a bit complicated, but it's actually not that important necessarily to understand the whole protocol of the work. What's more interesting maybe here is that the idea is the center of the piece is really the relation that we develop to this artwork, and that this work that lives on the website but also has like a life as an object is really about the relation that we build with it. And so this is why I wanted to show the website before actually it's being launched next week. And you can see the way you are asked to interact with the work. So you should make an offer to the work and then start a conversation basically. So we'll respond to you and the ideas that you have an extended relationship with it and over many weeks, maybe months. So yeah, this artwork I think is interesting in our context here because it really is like a networked asset. And the authorship is quite interesting because the authorship lies not so much in a collectivity like we saw in Shudi Chang's work, but more with these tridents, with these newts, so with the animals that don't actually have an interest in driving the narrative themselves. The circulation question is really interesting here, I think, because we are all kind of participating in this distributed network of creation of the work. And it touches on a lot of questions that also then brought us in our research process to investigate new models for distribution of moving images, which maybe we can discuss them a little bit later. So how can we actually generate resonance for work outside of mainstream streaming systems? Can we build something as like an artist or as an institution? Can we build something independently, or is that not even possible because we won't create the reach? And what kind of new forms of stewardship for artworks do we want to create? And then lastly, I think what's interesting here is that value, which has often been discussed in the context of NFTs and art living online. Value is not really built through scarcity anymore, but it's really about participation or relationality. So with that, I think I will pass on to Barbara, and then I'm looking forward to discuss with you. Thank you.
Hola, buenos días. Muchas gracias por estar aquí tan temprano. Soy Bárbara Cueto, so I'm the curator of el AES. No voy a hablar en español, desgraciadamente. But I will going to be presenting some of the ideas that I have over these years working with them, and especially with some projects that are especially browser-based and very tech-heavy. So I'm taking how digital circulation have transformed traditional notions of authenticity, authorship, and ownership. And especially I'm going to be focusing on this project that I curated last year called Read the Ocean Around You, by the artist collective Cross Lucid and the sci-fi writer Orion Fassé. This is an example of how digital artworks become somehow like living entities that evolve through participation and especially blurring boundaries between what is the non-human agency in the creative process and how they alter also the audience perspective, the participation, and the becoming some form of co-authorship. So I'm going to be presenting also an idea that I've been working on, so bear with me because this is still a bit of a blurb. And this is something that again, is a reflection, especially when last year I was working, teaching in the University of Leipzig, and kind of I needed more names to describe the things that I was doing. And I came up with this idea of curating digital practices as an act of repertoiring, so a way of transmitting knowledge through participation rather than preservation. So, last year, the project that I curated was To Fracture Time is to Create an Otherwise. This is a series of web commission projects where I pair digital artists and sci-fi writers to create new work. The artists and the writers didn't know each other, so this arranged marriage took a lot of time to create. When I'm going to explain one particular one, because I think it like kind of encompasses the complexity of like curating this kind of like network of participants. I'm going to start. Let's see if it works. I can leave it in the background just as a, like, it's a beautiful imagery behind. So the project was, this arranged marriage consisted of CrossLucid, which is an artist collective that engages with cross-disciplinary projects with technology. They explore the self as a network, digital intimacy, and reimagining technology alliances. Orion Fasey, in the way, is a British science fiction writer and designer that lives in Ishikawa in Japan, and his debut novel, The Virus Sexuals, earned cult following in the queer literary scene. So all To Fracture Time is to create an otherwise, like loosely was based on the idea of radical futurism, so like how alternative forms of sci-fi make us understand the future otherwise. So this was kind of like my blurb when I started working with them, and this kind of expanded to many different ways over many different months. So to kind of like finding this like common ground between the artists, there was really long conversations, a lot of workshops trying to find this common thread between them. And in this case, surprisingly, what was one thing that came again and again was always the idea of language, and particularly what escapes from language. So they were interested in these liminal spaces that can be grasped or expressed through language. And this was both in form of religion and religious experiences, and also in the liminal spaces that are black boxed in large language models. This ineffability became the center of the research. So this is something that we can't express, we can't explain, and we can know. And I think like somehow this imagery that you see here kind of really refers to that idea. This also implicitly brought us to the idea of what is the affect of the non-human. So Orion wrote a story that was loosely based on a dream that he had. This dream, in each, there was a character that encountered two omens, and he needed to decide whether to keep them, the stolen creatures, or like return them. The character was called Yu, and he was guided by a druid that it was called Claude, with whom he had to navigate the complexities of the project. So Read the Ocean Around You proposed somehow like a non-linear narrative through an interactive and generative online environment. The story of Orion took the shape of a choose your own adventure, meaning that there was like different endings. And the artist CrossLucid also wanted to explain this non-linearity but they wanted to explore it in a 3D environment. So this led us to create some sort of like a 3D environment where the visitor could move through and then find the different passages and like arrive to the endings, to different endings. So the project was the experience, we call experience here, was divided in 3 parts. This is the beginning, and the ending were like 3 different videos. And the medium part, the Healing Spring, was a 3D live generation of a 3D environment. This was like a swampy, we'll see it a bit later. Because it's a generative piece, it means that it's changing and it's live. It changes all the time, constantly, with different interactions. It's also not only that it changes constantly, it's also depending on the data trails, on your data threads, like the cookies that you have, the websites that you've visited, and also depending on the amount of people who's at the same time. So you will always have a different experience. If we have now all of us together will be in the same website, it will look completely different. So let's see what we get today. Yeah. So to guide the users, we also have a voice, someone that is asking us questions, which is this druid called Claude, which of course was in itself an LLM. So the technology behind this was to create the videos. We were, like the artists were fine-tuning the fusion models, using as the imagery their own one, and as the prompt they were using the stories from Orion Fasey. Like the guiding questions of the druid Claude were created also with an LLM that uses a data set, all the stories from Orion, and to create the voice that we will hear. This. The voice is also created by a mix, or like use the voice model to mix the voices from
thick wall of overgrowth.
It's
On the
like
other side, you could hear the familiar murmuring of a magical water.
So this voice is guiding you through the whole experience. As I said, the voice model was a mix between the voices from the artists, which are a couple cross-lucid, and also Orion's, creating this kind of like it depends on the moment. It sounds very androgenic, like it's hard to pinpoint if it's a man or a woman. The accents are all over the place because Orion is British but lives in Japan, and they like come from different brands in Hungary. So it's an interesting kind of. This is now we're getting to this place, the Healing Spring. Unfortunately, the project is only browser-based, so you can access it online or with your phone. Sorry. Yeah, the questions that this moves in different ways depending on the amount of people. I will look like today is really dark. Sometimes they're more colorful. If you see here, this is the questions, and they will ask you something, and then you will kind of like move through the different parts, trying to find the different angle, like the different endings, which at the end would also give you not only different videos but also a different story. Very complicated. Okay, let's move. Let's move. Okay. Very different kind of. I have to say that this is a silly thing, but I always have this funny because with projects like Cross-Lucid, we always kind of make me question like notions like distribution, like conservation and ownership. Now that before have very clear-cut answers, we find ourselves, or like I find myself in very many like gray zones with like ripple effects across the board. How and what do we conserve? What could we own? And if there is generative outcomes, there's always the problem. And how do we guarantee fair retributions? This, of course, it can sound sometimes a little bit of like abstract, but it, like now part of my job, and I have the feeling probably I share the same with you, is talking about IP. Who retains the right of the work? Like ultimately, it's only the artist. It's also the platform where this is going to be published. Do we also have to accredit the people that created the models in the case that they are not open source? And of course, this goes even bigger once we start thinking about the afterlife of the project. So there's a lot of concepts and processes that need to be reassessed and adapted to this new reality where the non-human agency holds a certain important role in the creative process. And of course, to talk about all of this, we need a multi-day symposium with a lot of other people. So I'm just going to be talking from my perspective as a curator, how I've been somehow dealing with these issues that I've been encountering over the years now. So this idea that I've been kind of, let's say, toying more or less, makes sense, is myself trying to make sense of what I'm doing exactly as a curator now, especially when I have to teach this, as I said, to my students, and also when I'm dealing also with very tech-heavy processes that need to also to be explained to the audience. So I've come to see exhibitions almost always as very limited kind of formats because they don't caption transmission in the same way. So thinking curation, so curatorial practice as a form of repertoiring offers for me this way of expanding traditional exhibition making, allowing us to create some sort of spaces where dissemination could thrive, where ownership is always shared, and trust becomes this collective state of mind between co-conspirators. And this, of course, means that we have to be open to and acknowledge the non-human agency, and especially that is not just a glitch in the system, as it was considered before, but it's a legitimate part in the artistic production. So the idea of repertoiring comes from me from someone that I really admire, which is Diana Taylor. This is a performance scholar. She wrote a book in the 90s, I think it is, when she started exploring two ideas of knowledge. One that is the written, stable knowledge that we all know, and the other one that is more performative and embodied. And this renders two types of preservation. One is the archive and the other one is the repertoire. The archive, I guess everyone knows it, is safeguarding supposedly enduring materials, and that means documents and artifacts and all sorts of things that we know. And then is the repertoire that hosts ephemeral practices. And these ones are verbal performances, and this is oral histories, and it could be also songs, it could be rituals, myths, and nonverbal practices. And these ones are dances, and they are choreographies maybe, and they are rituals, and they are sports. So the difference in these two parts is lies in how we consider transmission, because whereas the archive is always seeking endurance, with the repertoire, we're actually thinking that it needs to thrive in embodied and embodied practices and in repetition. So it is not only that that is important in the way that we store system, like as a storing system, it's also that performance is a system of learning. It's a way of transmitting knowledge. So performance has long keep the memory and the shaped identities of literate and semi-literate societies, and this means because not all the societies have arrived to modernity through written form, and especially she also mentions digital societies. And I hope that there's some kind of gamer in the group, but it's like we learn to play a video game in the exact same way that we learn to play like a video game or a piano. No, it's like it's always an embodied engagement that we have to enact. And examples are always the best way of seeing this. So TikTok. TikTok is an expansive repertoire of viral choreographies. These are continuously performed, they are always reinterpreted and transmitted. And of course, this offers, we need to think of like TikTok, as a system for sharing an ephemeral practice. It also creates a specific digital culture and facilitates a form of learning that is very physical, so like you always dance, but it's also very intangible and fluid. So this creates always a sense of belonging for the digital communities. And this idea of like belonging really like grows when we're thinking about trust, what it means trust. So it demonstrates that even within digital infrastructures, knowledge always circulates through performance, through repetition, and especially through affect. So not through static documentation. So, oops, sorry. So the repertoire requires presence. Knowledge is always produced and reproduced by the idea of being there. And unlike the fixed objects that we used to have in an archive, these repertoire-based performances or actions, they live through iteration. So digital works, like the ones that I presented from Cross-Lucid, this is a generative environment that always needs of you. It not only needs of you to look at it, but it also needs of your data to function. So it goes both ways. This also means that like there's an implicit instability because it's always in flux. Depending on who is there and how they behave, the work will look different. So this instability, of course, complicates preservation and ownership because there's no singular way or like one final object that you could have or own or archive. It always means that but if we look at it from the angle of the repertoire, it also opens up the perspective. We could have a repertoire allow us to think of like continuous enactment and transmission. So this way of like repertoiring creates some sort of like embodied memory that lives through the eyes of the beholder in a way. So like we are creating, this works exactly in the same way that a performance cannot go to the archive. Like you could have the video that recorded the performance that goes through the archive, and then you could always have the performance in itself that lives in your memory by being there, and also it will belong always to the repertoire of the artist who's like that develops it. So like digital artworks function similarly, they also become these living entities that kind of resist documentation. But they do not disappear, but they are always reactivated, which is encountered. And again, like the instability created a lot of problems, and this is why it's not like a clear-cut answer. Like this also poses a lot of issues for the institutions that host them, for the collector that wants to own them, and for the artist and the curator that wants to bring them to life. So to complicate more the things is authorship. If we think of authorship itself of digital artworks and like how that will go to the repertoire, we also see that authorship also became something fluid. It dissolves in a way. It's the same thing as like, if we think of like originality here as like something that is really related to provenance or authenticity, it also is kind of like difficult to see because we're not really trying to encompass or like to hold to one static object. We're really thinking about the more viral it goes, the more authentic it becomes, the more resonance that it will have. So authorship here needs to kind of extend and move beyond the maker and to include somehow the performance, the audience, and especially the algorithm. Now we have a human agents that we need to acknowledge because authorship now has become a performance in itself. Authorship is enacted, perceived, and crucially now is co-produced with a set of non-human beings or agents that also need to be acknowledged in this creative process. They are participants, they are audience, and especially now they are co-authors. So the question always, right, like, where does this leave us? So capturing or curating digital practices means to choreograph, or at least to me, means choreographing meanings, temporalities, and relations. It is not about capturing a static object in a point in time. Now has become a way of enabling performances of care and transmission. In generative works, again, like the ones that we see from Cross-Lucid, very like they are a bit like allergic to traditional conservation, but they do really open a new form of access. So they change with each interaction, they kind of like move because of the human input, because of the data flow, and also because of the machine learning processes. So we see that they are not as much as we consider stored as they are activated, meaning that once you go, you are not only the witness, but you are also a co-creator. Traditional works behave in super different ways, like they have a traceable origin, they are created in a specific point in time, and they have a stable creator. And now we see that with digital works, and like with this idea of creating a repertoire as a form of caring for digital works, we need to be open that authorship is something that is dissolving in a way, that causality is now non-linear, and human and non-human are always agents that are collaborating. And what it means for curators, collectors, and audiences, in my work, I really try to think less as a form of archivist, but more as an enabler or facilitator of live and ongoing experiences. And I really like the idea that I have to be embracing constantly the idea of fluidity, of participation, and especially unpredictability, because these are the real characteristics where digital practices thrive on. So to me, thinking about repertoire, it offers somehow like a new language, a new format, where that it asks to me that I need to be open to trust transmission, to work with technology, never as a tool, but as a companion, and recognizing curating as a form of like rehearsing. So repertoiring, as complicated as it might sound, to me, it helps me to understand and make sense of the present. A moment where like artworks are no longer an object that we need to keep, but this is like a relationship that we have to sustain. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me along. I'm going to talk a little bit in terms of the status of artworks in a kind of more meta sense, perhaps, and through the lens of where I work, which is at the ZKM, Zentrum für Kunst und Media in Karlsruhe, which looks like this. It's a giant factory repurposed as a cultural institution, but importantly, not a museum as such, but a center for research, education, production, dissemination. The idea was it was a kind of digital Bauhaus, electronic Bauhaus, created in 1989 when Karlsruhe wanted to become the Silicon Valley of Germany. I use as a starting point at one of our current exhibitions, which is the retrospective of Johan Gribenprez, the Belgian filmmaker, called All Memory is Theft. If anyone wants an amazing show, we're happy to tour it, by the way, because it is quite special, and a shame it would just stay in Karlsruhe. But Johan talks about who owns imagination when truth has become a shipwrecked refugee. This is kind of the starting point of his exhibition, but really what he does is you may know his work, he creates an archaeology of media through which we can take on the challenges and the truths and the mistruths of our current politics and our current economics. And he talks very much about, in the show, by using this history of TV and the history of the remote control, about this transition of control of authorship, and about how this now heralds in a different kind of age, which is changing the politics and our way of life. And in contrast to that, this is a piece by Robot Lab that we that we showed last year, where we have kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, which is two KUKA robots writing robot manifestos in blue chips on these conveyor belts with a token input from the audience, thinking that they're somehow having an interaction with these robots, but they just carry on writing their manifestos for the future. And at the same time, you know, this brings in an idea or an intention at ZChem about how we learn through making and doing, how we learn through play, in opposition to a kind of mechanical progress to some future, which is the kind of in the traditions of innovation or progress. And an artist like Duck He is quite interesting, because what she is doing is really talking about artificial stupidity rather than artificial intelligence, and trying to feed in kind of nonsensical or kind of non-rational sequences data into LLMs, into kind of our data sphere, in order to kind of wrestle back some kind of sovereignty, if you like, of the individual, but maybe also the image. But this, I think, is also, this idea of the sovereignty of the image is at the same time something that's falling apart, and something I think we really have to take on in a serious way when, you know, when we're talking about the distribution of the original object or the traditional artist, for example. And in parallel to those two works, I put together a kind of mini show, which was really about taking flatware from our collection, paintings and photographs from our modern art collection, with Thomas Struth and Polka and Baselitz and all these kinds of people, and essentially creating AI labels, so that these classics of our collection were stripped of their authorship, they were stripped of their meaning, and these LED screens produced new artist names, new titles, and new meanings for these works based on various strands of data that came in, including the visitor to the museum themselves. Really what I wanted to do was to kind of really kind of pull apart this kind of this stability that we believe exists in the kind of non-digital objects, in the material, to say that this is all now in play. This is all now up for grabs, and this is the field in which we're working. This similarly, in terms of kind of testing these kind of data sets and truth in public, is a work by Alexander Peterhansel, Smile to Vote, in which, based on the idea that your political preferences can be read by facial recognition, which is actually tested in scientific research. Produces a voting booth where it reads your face and tells you who you are most likely to vote for. And astonishingly, I remember a 12-year-old girl at the opening being told she was going to vote for the AfD. Her parents were horrified. And this also, in terms of how we navigate this with our collections, obviously we have, at ZChem, we've been involved in the NFT scene, you know, since its early days, and also collect NFTs. And it was also quite curious that at one point we famously in the sort of international press were noted that we had acquired a series of CryptoPunks for our collection, but managed to lose two. Or not lose them, but we say they went on holiday when they were reassigned an address and were lost forever. They were just there somewhere, but we could never gain access to them again. But rather than say this is a disaster, we kind of see this as part of our repertoire of how we engage with the digital sphere. And then coming more up to the work where we're doing now, where we're trying to think about how this can then be active in the world, rather than just being a place of presentation of ideas, but a place of development and contribution of ideas into the world. For a long time, I've been working with CATPC, the Congolese Plantation Workers Art League, who have themselves been producing or questioning authorship of images through the format of NFTs. And many of you may know this project, but we acquired a series of these NFTs of the sculpture of Barlow, which was in the Museum of Museum of Arts in Virginia, which was a sculpture from their plantations as kind of an effigy of a gangmaster on the plantations in the early 20th century. And they asked to borrow this work back for their village. It was refused, so they made an NFT and sold it at Basel Art Fair, and continue to sell it at Basel Art Fair to buy back land from the kind of corporate plantation owners in order to have their own sustainable economy. So this is really kind of hybridizing this world of real world action and kind of blockchain technology in very interesting ways. And this, becomes part of a much bigger conversation for me about really our operating system for the world, about how at this crucial moment do we leave it all in the hands of the Elon Musks, or do we somehow try and use our resources and our knowledge and our networks to bring this back home in a different way. And this is Kate Crawford and Vladan Yola's Calculating Empires project. Also, she's very well known for her Anatomy of an AI project, which is really looking at the material impact and the material actuality of AI, which brings it away from this idea of being some abstract entity out there in the cloud or wherever, and makes it actually part of our economy and our ecology on this planet. And this really has started a research program we're now embarking on, which is really looking at this archaeology of AI, but also bringing this archaeology with us in the present in order to kind of prefigure where we go next in terms of AI, and bring it back to the material qualities of crafting and shaping technology in the world in ways that serves most people rather than a few people. And part of this archaeology includes, next year we'll be showing this piece of machinery, which is the CM2, which was the first computer designed for artificial intelligence by Connection Machines in 1986, based on an idea by Richard Feynman, and realized by a whole team led by Danny Hillis, and interestingly designed by this German artist Tomiko Thiel, who created this kind of, it is based on 2001's HAL, but also then feeds forward into the future in it being the machine that Steve Jobs said, I want all my computers to look like this, find me the designer. But what we're doing, because we have the capability with all our nerds at ZChem, is to bring these machines back to life, that we have the engineers, we have the software geeks who can start to think about how to really understand what's inside the black box rather than just take it for granted. And incidentally, this machine was used for some amazing early graphics imagery in the 80s and 90s, and this is a very good example of artists playing with the machines in order to modify and articulate and put into the world intentions and ideas that were not necessarily there at the start. And this really also connected very much with me with another work in our collection, which is Multinode Metagame, which tells the story, which is by Enrique Gallardo, which is a gamification of the story of CyberSyn, which was a project many of you may know in Chile in the 1970s, where President Allende tried to create a computerized model for socialism in South America, where he created this Star Trek control room, where rather than it being a Big Brother model of operating the economy, was a way for all the population in live time to feed decision making and productivity into the collective whole. And of course, based on the world of cybernetic theory, initiated in Mexico in the 1940s, in this very interesting moment where people were learning essentially from nature, from ecology, in order to shape the functionality of the machines to make the world work in a smoother way, if you like. Stafford Beer was the British cybernetician who was brought in to sort of mastermind this project. But what I think is more interesting is that in a way he was an enabler. He was seen as he's slightly fetishized as a figure. But what really drove this project was a will, even based on indigenous Mesoamerican cultures, about how you might reimagine the world in another way. CyberSyn never actually happened in the end, thanks to the CIA, who certainly didn't want computerized socialism anywhere near their back door. And this really then transmitted still across the Americas. And interestingly, the Limits to Growth report was really a project which was around about the same time, commissioned by MIT, was really using this Latin American thinking, this thinking of cybernetics, of how you might model the world to basically to predict disaster. What the Limits to Growth report said, basically, if you carry on doing what we're doing, there's going to be environmental catastrophe and much worse, which is shown here. But interestingly, although they were kind of right, another strand of this came through other South American models and cybernetic theories to create things such as the Latin American world model, modeled on these machines, which was about actually saying, well, no, what happens if we did something else? What happens if we took into account indigenous cultures? What happens if we took into the idea of a minimum wage? How could we actually make a genuine participatory democracy using the technologies that we have around them? Again, thanks to the CIA, this Peruvian model was put to the sword. But what we're thinking now within ZKM is, despite this suppression of these ideas of how you actually might make another economic model, using our data, using the systems, the technologies we have around us, what would happen if we tried and tested models such as this on machines like we have now, like these NVIDIA beauties? Incidentally, the NVIDIA chips were first created for the CM2 by Jensen Huang in 1986. So there is a bit of archaeology and genealogy in this as well. But what we wish for at ZKM is that in this kind of crazy world of kind of multi-directional energies and information, if we could have machines like this offline in our cultural institutions that are taken off-grid, if you like, and where we can make and test ideas and work with them in ways that they are also protected, using basically the infrastructures of the institution and the museum and the kind of social intentions of a public institution, what might we be able to feed into the world as an antidote to the situation we currently have? And this may also be expanded because we have the opportunity to use this machine, which is called scarily called Hunter, and it's the 7th most powerful computer in the world in Stuttgart. And we've managed to basically gain access to this machine. We now at ZKM have the opportunity to run artist residencies and programs with this machine in order to test these kind of large-scale projects that we couldn't otherwise imagine. Kind of just to conclude a little bit is that what I'm really trying to suggest or put forward is that we need to create a complete new economic system ultimately, in order if we are going to do anything well in this world, and rather than making artworks which stand alone, like our flatware in our collection, and essentially do nothing, I'm interested in moving from the world of the representational to the operational. And this was always the idea of media art. And I think you also touched upon it in your description of this repertoiring. But maybe there's a way we can actually work with artists and engineers to suggest systems such as this. This is a proposal by Burak Arakan for basically a system of international living artworks that sit in different collections or different locations, but talk to one another, grow with one another, learn from one another, and expand and evolve in a mutual ecological way. And this is a very different version of what an artwork would be, but closer to my idea of art, which is a process which we engage in to shape the world and to basically make it more livable in. So my hope is that our institutions, speaking as an institutional head, can really be the place where we prefigure this future in a different way and work with artists and art-like people to create something different. Thank you.
Thanks. I feel like thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. And the invitation was an interesting question from Filipa Ramos to this event, which was, you who spent your life with Arte Povera, why are you spending time talking with people? That is the question. And I thought, oh my God, I must have terrible contradictions. And most of us do. But I also feel like a dinosaur because I'm not at all directing a program of digital art or an institution of digital art. And I know very little, really, about digital art. Actually, I know very little about everything, but it's all one big kind of blur. But once you've retired, and I've retired from the institution, so just to, I found very beautiful how your talk, Barbara, connected with Alistair's, because you said something about the archive, the repertoire instead of the archive, and then we went into an institution that wants to somehow be an institution of repertoire in a way, hanging on to the history of the materiality of this world and enlivening it. And the last thing you said about the institution is interesting for me because I retired from the institution, because I have very little faith that the institution can make a dent in the worlds to come, or the worlds that are already here. I loved the word imagicologies, though, and it just, one thing that came to my mind listening to one of you, first, I think your wonderful little introduction, was that it's kind of, we come to our work and our profession and our life in a certain prime time. There's a moment where I am 13 and I have my menstruation. There's a moment when I arrive at university, a moment when and it's situated not just geographically within a European or or whatever Southern European place, but it's situated historically. So we all see the world starting at one time. So when you were speaking, I said, no, that's not right at all. It all started in the 90s and digital art. And so in the early 90s, and someone older than me would say, no. It all started in the 60s or the 50s or the 40s. And then it gets lost in this history of what is the beginning. But I remember being on juries where there were artworks in the mid-90s that were certainly, it was called net art, but it existed, and there were people doing many projects like putting something so it breaks your, there was one about Amazon where suddenly everything was free. On Amazon, for one day or two it worked and everybody bought whatever they wanted for free, and many projects. And I'm also a little bit thinking, therefore, why the 90s, and as I was listening to you, it's generational, although I'm from the 70s, late 70s, finished university, I think in 81. It was because of, and this brings to my cynicism, because I'm a cynic, fundamentally, in the line of skepticism. So Sectus Empiricus and Pirone the Great, which goes through cynicism and Adorno and but fundamentally a cynic. And I remember clearly that the time when this occurred was more or less when Bill Clinton privatized the internet. So all the utopian works, like the first, I remember, website interactive participatory project was the file room of Montadas, based in a place in Chicago called Randolph Street Gallery. And it was in the mid-90s, and the first, work connecting to places through the internet with a camera, that kind of thing, that was Wolfgang Stehle, and it was precise. I went to the opening, it was 1994 at Postmasters Gallery in New York. And it all has to do with the moment when the internet is not just military research and private, but is also open to investment. So right from the beginning, when even the most, let's say, good, buonismo, we say in Italian, the good projects were emerging, was actually laying the basis for what we are in now and for the situation. So it's not like art was somehow good and the rest was bad. I think artists often in history, whatever they are, they're ambivalent figures, and they're anche figure minori in a way. So anyway, the Clinton thing was the Telecommunications Act. And then I remember going to Transmediale, which started in 98. And it sort of was a video festival in 88. And many, many things. And then I think always when we speak about the end of the author, I always think, Roland Barthes and the end of it. Art has been dying since it's been born. And it was not born thousands of years ago. It was born in the 18th century, in the middle of Europe, with Kant and Winkelmann. It's not a globally thousands of years ago idea. I mean, that's an anthropological turn which includes somehow the civilization from all over the world into the canon of what we call art. Even for Vasari, it was not, the artist was almost a craftsman, and when the word bello just means well-crafted. So it was the biography of a certain kind of craft people who were the makers of flat images or the makers of... So even this, I don't understand even this question of art, for God forbid the digital age. But I asked ChatGPT to help me for today because you asked me for a text. So I put a text and I put an image. So this fair, which is wonderful, I went through all the little hotel rooms yesterday and I really enjoyed it. It did make me feel indeed a little bit in the past, a little bit, because of the sheer number of videos that are on the internet and in the world. So this question of selection was very harsh for me. It seemed a little harsh. But then I reined in that feeling, thinking, well, also when you show paintings, there are many, many paintings in the world, and you can make a selection and make a painting show. But it seemed very, in a way, traditional, but I like tradition, so no problem. So here we have, so the task was moving images. So this is moving images for me. It doesn't, this is a picture from Chauvet. And so a very recent discovery of moving images that are certainly moving images, very close to the chronophotographie, I suppose. And how you deal with moving images. And this is the question of the relationship between power and technology. So it's an old question. It's kind of silly to think that we can be free from this question. It makes no sense. Just knowing how to make fire is a military question. And everything, as we know, is military. So that's why I just brought a Mamluk. Beautiful. And the question of aesthetics and war and aesthetics and technology is always overlooked in the recent years. When we speak about technology or we speak about the digital age and digital art, it's often framed as an analysis of systemic questions. It's very rarely discussed in terms of aesthetic questions, which is odd given that aesthetics are at the basis of our concept of art when we detached it in the 18th century from applied arts and created high art, les beaux-arts. Elles sont belles, les beaux-arts. And therefore, why would we then be discussing only in terms of structural or the so-called critical consciousness, which is an extremely hard claim. It asks for a hierarchy of intellectuals who are able to apply their intellect to analyzing and deconstructing power structures. And it is extremely elitist, if you look at our world, to request that an artist or a curator or an institution base their work on critical consciousness, because it's still about this external subject that is understanding. And even if it's about teaching, education, the relationship between the museum and education was fundamental in the 19th century. For example, Victorian age, it was a way of ordering, kind of like in team labs, it's a way of organizing and ordering the Sunday for the workers that would not be drinking alcohol and would be washing and cleaning to go see the museum in the 1800s. So I kind of find a very rigid politics in the so-called politically motivated institution even. And I wonder why we don't speak about the questions of aesthetics, what brought copper and steel and aluminum into use in order, some things like lead are more malleable and some less, more malleable a little bit like copper, but then you put in a little of zinc and it's bronze, a little harder, and then you develop the Iron Age, and what is because of the question of strength, it simply is stronger. So if you put an Anthony Gormley iron cast sculpture at Margate in the water, it will last longer than it will not bend or so the questions of materiality, but also of form, how you can embed a vision which is not a perspective, Renaissance perspective, but for example an entangled perspective that everybody's talking about now as if they discovered something new with quantum mechanics, but so much of it is in different points of multi-perspectival representations in the history of civilization, like wishing that the horse robot drone be a killer, more of a killer in this case, is also connected with the aesthetics of the vision that's on the brain, in fact, of the robot drone Mamluk piece. Anyway, I just thought I'm supposed to talk to you about moving images. So the moving image, Mare, and then I thought of Balla, that's moving image too, 1912 or 14. It was supposed to be in presentation mode so I could read the little caption, but it's not. So I think it's 1912 or 14, and it's now, I don't even know where it is exactly. Anyway, it has black and white, so it's alluding to black and white photography, which of course is the basis of the moving image. So this concept of truth I find also very naive, because the association between an image and truth is only a century and a half old. Before that, when there was just painting, nobody would have thought that a painting is representing something true. I mean, even when you sent a portrait of your future wife from one noble place in Germany to a place in France, you would certainly, who received it didn't think that necessarily she really looked so good. So this idea of truth related to the image is only since we've discovered that light refracts off of objects, and we can fix that with silver that with oxygen becomes grayer. And it created the negative world and the world of photography and the world of film, and some painters were thinking about that. And the color, there's a beautiful color study of this painting, where the red is and where the purple is and what it means and how the movement is portrayed. Anyway, for me this is moving image. Fontana's moving image, because when you cut a canvas, you are making an object that changes whether you have a big light, a strong light, it's 3 a.m, it's 10 at night, it's in a big room, it's in a small room, the person can see well, the person can't see well. So it's creating a moving image. It's a light show of light. And so the question of why I was shaped by Arte Povera, all the artists I learned more from them than from university. I was about 20 years younger than most of them. Now there are only 5 that are alive. But Michelangelo, for example, is super interested in collective intelligence and AI and making his QR code paintings. And he's very lively, 94-year-old. But the most I can say about this question is that I think what Filipa was touching on is that I'm interested in art that is very radical in the sense that it changes what we think is art, because art itself is a prison. And therefore we have to somehow free ourselves from this Enlightenment idea of art, in my view, altogether. I don't think there'll be museums of contemporary art in 100 years. I really don't. It's a crazy idea after World War II, the atomic bomb, that you could be cum tempore, that you could be with the time, with that moment when the clock stops. It's crazy to me. So anyway, the arte povera people would always tell me, Mario Merz, you see an igloo with neon, he would always tell me, not only I'm a dinosaur and I'm very contemporary, but he would say there's nothing, this idea that arte povera is about poor materials is an idiotic idea. We have no interest in this question of poor materials. It's a question of energy and transformation. And therefore, there was nothing different between the artificial neon that you see on an igloo and the igloo made of stone or mud sacks. It's a question of time. It's different temporalities in the same way that a thought is materially embodied in neurons and synapses, and if you don't have salt, you can't think, because there's no jump, there's no electrical event that occurs. So this idea of thinking of machines as not alive and humans as alive, or stones as not alive, it's all so limited, and not understanding also how things are questioned to different moments of movement. Some things move very slowly, like a carbon-based organism turning into marble. It's a very slow transformation. So the question is always a relationship between how time and space are entangled. And that's moving images. It was a lot of horses in the gallery, and they were there for the time of the exhibition. Of course, it's January 1969, and it's a garage carefully converted into a gallery, so it's a little bit, the artist saying, well, you could have left it as a garage, and I have a lot of horsepower. But anyway, Cunelis has always been playful and surrealist, and fire is certainly a technology, as we discussed a moment ago. And the question of fire in art, therefore, is not so different from the question of the flow of memes today, the mimetic energy. So, in fact, in the dOCUMENTA in 2012, when I brought in Anton Zellinger's entire lab from Vienna, so we didn't, I worked with Zellinger as if he was an artist, and I don't care. To be honest, I don't care. If you think Boetti is an artist and Zellinger is not, or Zellinger is an artist, or who's a scientist, it's senseless to me, senseless. So when I worked with Zellinger, I worked like I would work with an artist. So I was totally uninterested in a science exhibition where you show what quantum physics does or achieves. But I said, let's do it, yalla, yalla. And there was this, and inshallah we did it. So we entangled photons. They were split, and one was in one end of the Friedrichianum and one was in the other. He had already done the Canary Island experiments, mix experiment with exhibition that are quite synonymous in my world. And then during the day, there were people from his team trying to explain it. And during the night, what you see on the blackboard were Zellinger's notes trying to teach the artists quantum. So when the audience would leave, another whole thing would start, which was at 7 p.m. to 9 every day for 100 days almost. Anton did his explaining. So everyone from Rabbi Merouet to Pierre Huyghe to, we all would just meet in the Zellinger place. But now, after many, many years, I understand, I think, why I did it. And I think it was because it did not involve transmission. So this was the basic of what will be our quantum computers, if they ever actually exist, because it's more a marketing device than a real thing. We're very far from quantum computers because, I mean, it's just... but anyway, he was applying for money, saying it's the basis of quantum, which is that you don't have to transmit anything and encrypt it, because if it changes here, it changes on the satellite. So this idea of no transmission was somehow in my subconscious, I think, determining the motive for this. And I think it is because you didn't have to put a cable, you didn't have to... there was no actual relation, except a mysterious one of simultaneity. And that today, I think, explains why quantum is so popular with young people, because they're all into this cosmic religious thing. And therefore, I think it comes a little... They see in quantum a kind of scientific explanation of weird things, you know, spooky action at a distance. But when someone sent me a question, you know, well, is the relationship between your interest in arte povera connected with your Hito Steyerl's idea of poor animation? And I said, no, not at all. And in fact, today, and that's not something that I was interested in at all. And I found, and with Hito, and did a solo exhibition with her as well, and loved the work, of course. But I found the concept of poor animation, poor something, very late, years after other things like William Kentridge's poor animation, what Rosenkrauss called Stone Age animation. But that wasn't interesting to me because you can simulate poorness and it can become very chic. It's like shabby chic. So now we have the Generation Z, and they're all making blurry, bad, shabby chic images on the internet, and it's a fashion. And then I wanted to tell you, the moving images, that what is interesting to me about the digital art now, I mean, I'm interested in all digital art, of course, but what brought me to people was the NFT sale, the $69 million sale, which I couldn't believe it. And I thought there must be a scam. You know, it has to be some sort of insider trading. And who are these people who have that amount of money anyway? Everybody's so poor in the world. And is it maybe just an algorithm, a machine that produces this every day and so on? So I wanted to meet him. And indeed, he was not an algorithm. And he's an extremely intelligent person who had a very strong knowledge of a lot of things, because he was a designer before, and when he would go to Amsterdam to a design festival, he'd go to see the Rembrandt, and so kind of interesting figure. And anyway, then I learned that some of the people that were in the net art, in the digital art world, so I skipped a sentence. Important sentence. It was a lapsus to skip it. So what I was actually interested in is the relationship between money and images. And therefore the question of NFTs was interesting to me. And I believe that the money is a kind of material part of the artworks, of some artworks, let's say, of many artworks that are NFT'd. And certainly they were between 2014 and 2020 after COVID, because we are living in a coded world, and we are living in a world that is where everything is translated into numbers. Even your husband, if you meet them on an app, it's all translated into numbers. So it's like this Maya civilization, and I think the money is really just, when you see it go up, and it's like the Mayan calendar. So I consider it a material also, which translates the attention economy, basically. So the first so-called NFT, I thought I'd show you. How do I make it work. Click on it. Make it move, because it's like moving images. How'd you do that? Maybe you would like to stay near, because this is going to happen a lot. And I love young people too. So what did you do? How did it stop?
Like this?
No, that's the smart contract. Yeah. Okay, that's it. That's the whole thing. It's 5 seconds. And it was designed, and I realized that some of the artists that were at the beginning of this were really already in my exhibitions. Like I did a show called Animations at PS1, which included all these people, and again, I didn't understand what they were doing. I just put them all in. Old people, dead people, I don't know, Len Lai to Jennifer and Kevin McCoy, to all these people, Jordan Crandall, all these people. I had no idea. We just gave them the spaces. How did you do that? So I'm going to do it again. So this is the first NFT. So, and it was Jennifer and Kevin McCoy. Jennifer made the image, and it had to do, as someone mentioned, with the word that they use in the 2000s, scarcity, which we used to call rarity. But the digital people found that rarity sounded poor, and they wanted to use scarcity, so they used scarce. But I think scarce sounds poor, so I use rarity. So anyway, there's the first NFT in the whole history of the world. Kevin worked with a friend of his who knew blockchain technology. Now I'd like to go to the next slide. And there was this blockchain called Namecoin, and that's the actual original address of it. Then Namecoin ended. This was before Bitcoin. And so now it's again on chain, on Ethereum. So they put it back on Ethereum, and it was sold as digital archaeology, just for your archaeological research, for 1.4 million. But then there was this huge legal thing for the passage of from Namecoin to Ethereum that used up most of that money. So Jennifer and Kevin are not rich. Anyway, but 1.4 is like, in these Mayan calendar numbers, it's nothing. So these were the everydays that were sold, and I had to pack them into one image, the first 5,000. So they speak, of course, about this flow. And then the other thing that was happening in the 2000s, and then I'm going to read you this text that ChatGPT kindly, with my prompts, wrote for me. But this, I want to make it go. No. Aitana, please stay. Let's get her a chair. How did you do that?
Just by clicking on the screen.
But I did that too.
Okay.
Okay. So here we are, and this is inside Team Labs. Team Labs, because two things happened. On the one hand, the question of on-chain transactions through the various entities which are substituting the galleries. So the art galleries became almost dead with this type of art. It wasn't interesting to the artists, and it wasn't interesting to the galleries for a number of reasons. And that was one thing happening, the buying and selling. So this flows, these energy flows going around on the web. Sometimes $1. I mean, there is a negative preconception, Alistair, against this world, as if it is the representation of Peter Thiel and extreme right-wing techno-feudalism. I find that it is much more complex than that, and there are people like Pac who made the whole project of NFTs where you're buying things, who raised the 20 million euros to pay for Julian Assange's lawyers, for example. So there's a lot going on than just identifying it with techno-libertarians, in my view. But I may be wrong. And anyway, the second thing that was happening was the immersive environment. So it was immediate how to not be only online, how to bridge the physical and the digital worlds. So a group of architect artists in Japan created this thing. I'm going to do it again. This one just opened in Abu Dhabi like 3 weeks ago. As you can see, people are using their phones in it. And it moves, everything moves, and the floor moves. And the first one was borderless in Tokyo in 2018. And if you speak with the Team Labs people, they are also interesting people. They are not interesting people, but they have this idea that is similar to the 1960s Carlos Cruz Diaz environments, light environments, that are as utopian as Carlos Cruz Diaz, but as Carlos Cruz Diaz didn't really change the world, they don't change the world. And secondarily, Team Labs has become very much close to architainment and spectacle because of the way that the institution, again, the institution obliges you to create a strict parcours because of health and safety reasons. So although they would have liked people to walk around freely, you can't in none of them, neither in Tokyo nor in anywhere. You have to follow a very, very precise path, so it becomes kind of like going to Euro Disney or something like that. So in the line of architainment, and I think they've transformed into that kind of people. But anyway, the end of how many more minutes? 1 minute. Oh, I better read you the ChatGPT. So I'll just skip all this. This is called the Tree of Knowledge, and it's people, because he became immediately interested in bridging the digital and the physical object and catering to the tastes of the traditional art world. So he decided, well, I'll just make boxes, you know, and that way the boxes will be liked because they have a thing to them. But this is a box that you control in the sense that you can you fast forward it? That you can go from a more yoga type serenity, oh, I'm going to feel great if I do my yoga online, to, can you just make it go like, how do I, this is how I do it, right? Go, yeah, just keep going with, you see how you can control it, get more and more data in, and until you can actually be doing your yoga if you want, watching the stock exchange all over the world. And if you want, you can also just watch more and more figurative, more and more documentary, more and more photographic, keep going. I'm doing this fast. And then this is if you really want to just watch the news. It has everything, CNN, Fox News, everything. So, and the person who's doing it can actually do that. And so I was going to show you, we're going to speed. Could I have 1 more minute?
Of course.
Okay. So the big question now for me is about, of course, generative word to image things. There's no sound. This was done in like 3 days, and it's about $500 to make. So there's something very important in the question of when people can make movies so quickly and so easily and so cheaply, and without big institutional labs where you can do all this. So this was made by, it's not an artwork necessarily, it's just a movie made for Halloween by a guy called Sam Meyer.
So most days I just stay home and listen to the world outside.
But it tells us something, the most interesting thing to me, philosophically, is the fact that we are moving to images which are produced by words and not the opposite. So before in film we had scripts, which were words that the people would speak, but all of the sets and the places were inspired by photographs of locations or creating locations, and that influenced, of course, you can't have, you know, the movie with the helicopters going in Vietnam without having images made first. You wouldn't even have that scene created. So now there's this world that is more, less Maya, more Egyptian, because it goes from it goes from words to images, and that changes everything. It structures the films in a different register of human language. So, I mean, Lacan, we're not going to show it. It blocked out. We need a real technician while I'm reading. So I just wanted to show you one everyday made by Mike on yesterday. And what the material is really, he's like channeling and translating these flows. Could we turn it back on? These flows of energy that are coming, and it explains a lot about the politics now, that come from something someone says. Trump said, "Quiet piggy," to a journalist yesterday, actually 30 hours ago. And in Air Force One, when she was asking him about the Epstein files. And he said, "Quiet piggy." And this quiet piggy went around the world in less than you can imagine, and it produced thousands of variations, videos and memes, and Trump with the face of a pig and so on. And at the same day, Mohammed bin Salman yesterday was with, so could we just put it?
Just 1 second, maybe to understand how much time we have left and how the energy.
Well, I can interrupt. I can interrupt, but
do you want, how long would you want?
I just need one image there, and
the presentation for just one last image, and maybe then we wrap up. So we
I just want the image of Trump and Mohammed bin Salman and the piggies. Yes, and that day, you can put that on. The two other things happened. One was the sale of the, what's his name? The Catalan America, which actually sold for zero because it sold for the value of the gold. So it's a very interesting thing that nobody bought it. Basically, somebody bought it for the value of the gold, which is like the opposite of the numbers around Damien Hirst's diamond skull. And the second thing was the sale of the Klimt. And now I'd like to see the next the image that he made. Oh no, that's Trump with Mohammed bin Salman. To the left, you see the everyday of yesterday, and which was made, and you see puts it all together, Epstein and all of that. So it's channeling, and part of the work is actually the social media reactions, and it channels in the energy, and it channels it out and produces other things. I don't care if it's art or not. Anyway, this is ChatGPT, to answer your question. But I had to write the prompt very carefully and then, fix it. I had to fix it because you can't just ask ChatGPT something and then it comes out decent, comes out bad. So when people ask me how it is possible that I asked it to do it in the voice of Carolyn, and there's a huge data set of me online because I'm old, 68, so I have a lot of stuff out there. So it knows how to speak like me. So when people ask me how it's possible that I've long loved arte povera, those fragile earthly gestures with felt, fire, salt, neon, stones, and that I also love people with his pixel storms of speculative futures, I think the answer is actually very simple. It always is simple for ChatGPT. I have always been interested in art where novelty is not a style but a shift in the conditions of possibility. New mediums are not just tools, they are new ways of sensing and understanding the world. Arte povera emerged in the mid-1960s at a moment when artists understood matter as energetic, alive, unstable. When Cunelis brings a flame into the gallery, or when Pennone follows the growth of a tree, they are not making objects, they are showing us forces, and those forces are the material of the artwork. In that sense, people too is working with forces, except now those forces are algorithmic, computational, circulating through a planetary infrastructure owned, of course, by billionaires and their shadow empires. Yes, there are biases and controls embedded in the system, but within those systems, despite them, through them, images move. Or perhaps more importantly, images become movement. They morph, they have a kind of informational metabolism. We used to speak of moving images, cinema, video. But what we have now are images that move on their own, mutating in real time, shifting through networks, not only because of the computational energies of servers and GPUs, but because single people, users, participants, strangers online, touch them, alter them, remix them, similar to what you were saying, I think. These images change mimetically. They are propelled not only by machines, but by collective imagination, by the tiny gestures of millions who reshape, distort, and propagate them. In this sense, the image becomes a social organism continuously rewritten by the hands and minds of those who encounter it. And then there is the issue of sight, which has always mattered to me. A work is not separable from where it happens. A site is a context, an ecology, a set of conditions, temporal, social, political, architectural. In a way, digital space is just another site, though with different physics. The space, as digital folk say, is perhaps the space, as digital folk say, is perhaps an oxymoron, a non-space that nevertheless shapes meaning. It is a new context where art is not merely exhibited, but generated, circulated, and recontextualized in perpetuity. And that means that digital art, when it is good, is not placeless at all. It is profoundly site-specific, but its site is a stack of servers, a peer-to-peer network, a blockchain ledger, a virtual plaza. These are not immaterial, they are architectures with consequences. So perhaps the connection between Arte Povera and Beeple is not as strange as it seems. Both are practices that respond to energetic conditions, one to the energies of matter, the other to the energies of data, and meme-like human intervention. Both create situations where art is not a static image, but a dynamic event. And both in their own way remind us that art lives where transformation happens, where things circulate, and blah, 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 in a cave, in a street in Kassel. And then I added one thing about, I said, but help me with virality. When something goes viral, say Trump muttering "quiet piggy" to a journalist caught on a phone camera, the interesting question is not simply what happened, but how the image begins to move and why attention amplifies around it. First, an image, I understand. First, an image never moves alone. It is carried by affect, by shock, outrage, pleasure, curiosity, disgust, humor. In the past, an image moved because a gallery or a museum or a broadcaster distributed it. Today it moves because millions of people make micro decisions. They forward it, clip it, subtitle it, mock it, repeat it. Ironically, the image is not just circulating, it is being metabolized. The viral moment. Anyway, it goes on and on and on, and we get to, so how does attention grow? It grows through contagion between minds, not through top-down broadcast. Of course, we know a lot of other things.
I think...
and so we end, but I want to end with this idea of contagion of the minds, because that's the other thing there are two things interesting to me. One is the question that I said before that I forgot, and the second is contagion between minds. It is quite unbelievable, and I don't think political systems or structures or anything like that can be in any way innovative or helpful to any social cause unless this question is addressed, that people are very lonely in this digital world. They're on their phones all the time. And that happens whether you're in Africa or New York. And what they do is they crave, there's like a craving for this connection between minds. And so when my thing gets, I send it to you and you send it to him and you send it, this thing can happen in like 1 hour. You can get 1 million people around the world in 1 hour that are working. So I think this is a very dangerous energy, as fire was dangerous, as the atom was dangerous, as all forms of energy have been dangerous throughout the history of the planet. Like, look what happened to the dinosaurs. It was terrible. That was a lot of energy. So, but it is a question of understanding how those energies work, are harnessed, are owned. And I don't think the simple idea of sharing, I mean, the simple taking socialist ideas and applying them, it makes, for me, it's not going to work, which is why I retired.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for this tour de force. Thank you so much for your patience. I think, do we do questions or? One question, the next questions we'll take them upstairs on the rooftop with a drink or something. Like super brief. Caroline, you just earned your second name chat.
Yeah, please. Well, Emmanuel, thank you very much for your open contributions. I have two questions, actually. The first one...
Just one. We only allow one, sorry.
Well, yeah. I think that it's also a question of respecting the audience and leaving the principle of a symposium. And we're discussing about this. So the first question would be, just like the question of authorship is not a co-authorship for digital auto-generative works. It's not a new one. It was at the basis of aesthetics until the Renaissance with Platonism and Neoplatonism. But still now, for this future co-authorship, what is entailed with co-authorship is also the notion of responsibility and accountability. And it's a question for all of you: how do you envisage the notion of accountability and responsibility in this co-authorship? Then the second very small question would be, just like me as a naive beholder, contemplator, recipient and agent of aesthetic emotions and impressions, what I resist and I suffer in immersive or architainment, as you said, just like proposals, is the very important moment of the pause in the aesthetic contemplation, the critical contemplation. And my resistance to immersive proposal, generative proposals, is very often that they are a parody of democracy, co-authorship, and participation, because there is not this moment of pause that is necessary. Okay, these are the two simple questions.
Thank you. Do you want to answer the first one, maybe?
Yeah.
I mean, I think of co-authorship, I think this is, I try to kind of sketch it at the beginning. This is questions that arise in my everyday work, and this is what I mentioned, that IP all of a sudden has become such a nuanced conversation with artists, with the platform. This is something that you really need to address, especially in the afterlife, because we talk about generative pieces that are going to be constantly ever creating new outcomes. Then we need to be thinking about accountability. We need to think about who is behind the models. This is another question. This is this is a question that expands much more than the artist, than the agency of the non-human. All these things that I was trying to explain is also that we are talking with gigantic companies behind this, and how do we control those? Not the artist, not the artwork. That's not the you can't. And then I'm not gonna retire. I'm gonna talk about it.
You're too young.
But this is this is one of the questions. I have a project now with Google, and this is really how do we work with the models without allowing the artist to retain all the rights for the work, while at the same time using the models in a nuanced way, in a critical way, knowing their accountability is a gigantic endeavor. It takes many lawyers to work with us to kind of craft contracts, because at the end it all goes back to law. The same is this idea of the protocol is also the idea of the contract is already conceptual art. So we're doing this thing of when we talk about smart contracts, smart contracts are not a smart or contract, that are mini programmable kind of. We have technologies to solve this. Blockchain is fantastic for this. Blockchain is also very difficult and complicated. So how are we gonna craft the new models for the future? Where there's going to be this accountability and responsibility, is that what we need to talk now. And this is why artists and projects like this help us envisioning what could happen later on. Because now it's we're still we have a buffer time where some artists are still proposing really good ideas of how to respond to this, like Holly Herden and Mike Dryhouse, for example. They have these combinations of AI models together with Holy Plus, that is a blockchain-based DAO, a DAO that regulates, gives rights, etc. So there's systems, there's possibilities. How we enact them is the question, really, and how much agency are we going to give to the audience, again, to be critical to the things that we're producing for them? This is going to be the question for the next 5 years, I think.
Maybe you want to ask the second question?
Well, I think they're all related as well, because I mean, and again, in a way, what I was trying to get at was the point was not to reenact socialism, but actually to look at the mechanisms that are different than the ones we have now, in order to combine those and create different thinking structures that allow kind of like the ethical structures that actually work for more people than the current systems that we have. That's the principle, and the whole mechanism is so fluid and so complex now that we have to embrace it. It's not that there's one or the other, and so we have to navigate this kind of sea, this ocean, this complete water system of information, data, like everything happening all at once, all at the same time. But we now have the machines, or potentially have the machines, in order to calibrate that and set it in a way that isn't screwing the planet, or isn't, creating poverty. There is ways to do it. It is possible, and it's been shown to do that. And so I think that it's more in that direction that we need to be thinking about.
Nobody answered your question about contemplation. That's a very conservative way, I think. I think it's a conservative concept, the concept of contemplation. But I agree with you, and I said it before, the problem with the team labs environments are that you are scripted. You are supposedly freer to move around and enjoy, but you're actually extremely scripted, like in Euro Disney when you go through something. So that's the problem with those environments, in my view, how they counter with health and safety issues that are typical of institutions. But I think that, unfortunately, the system really has to change completely. And I believe that the museums are the location where a certain controlled system or system of control of the human in the so-called public space is most and best experimented, because it's about the question of the security of the material artwork, the painting that you pulled out of your storage by Baselitz or whatever you said you pulled out. I mean, the question of security cameras and polite security and guards that have become mediators that are really nice to you and all that. You know that the laws in Italy for COVID regulations were developed analyzing 5 museums. I was part of the group, so I know. And we were Museo Egizio, Castello di Rivoli, and 2 others. And through those, we devised the rules of, for example, what is the distance, minimum distance for not getting contagion and all of this. So there is something deeply embedded in the experience of art as it has been reso laico, how do you say, desacralized after the end of religious art and chapels, that has developed a system that is a forced system of contemplation. But I don't know if art, I think that you're basing your question on a definition of art which implies a certain concept of what is aesthetic experience. And it's fine. There's nothing, I think, wrong with that, but it's culturally dependent. It's not something that's worldwide. It's, yeah, you can call it whatever you want. Yeah, you can call it whatever you want. Yeah, you can call it, yes, it's true, but it is culturally specific.
But I would really worry about institutions or museums or art institutions becoming places of contemplation. And I think one of the problems is contemplation has become like distraction therapy.
Yes.
In this sea of everything. And so in a way, and there's actually a scientific research which shows that people think and contemplate better when they're doing things like cleaning the dishes or doing gardening than when they're sat trying to sort of meditate into
Well,
some
it
other
means
space.
with the temple
So it's
contemplation.
so it's a process. You have to be engaged in the process and active, not static and still. And these places are slightly worrying to me.
I think maybe to close, or
why?
Because we've been running over 30 minutes, unfortunately, and we have a panel starting in 5 minutes.
Another panel.
So I just want to say really briefly. I think without even having the possibility of to wrap up this tour de force that we just made here with all of you, thank you. I think it's become very clear that art has changed a lot, like not only how we deal with art, but also where we encountered, how we encountered. We had this idea of art institution as a sandbox, right, where we like model like new forms of engaging with art, and yeah, there was like also the question of the terms of the exhibition becoming an experiment, or as you said, the project becoming an experience. So I think there's like a lot to unpack still, and yeah, we won't end today. Thank you so much, Filipa, for bearing with us, and thank you all.